On today's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, it's an edition of State of the Cats. On today's show, we will bring in the radio play-by-play voice of the Florida Panthers, Doug Plagens, to discuss the Florida Panthers through 60 games and what has happened this week at practice, and talk about more of Anthony Duclair and the 22-game sprint that the Florida Panthers will be on this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Thursday, February 23rd edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're to your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez, and you can follow me on Twitter at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on Twitter at LO_FLA Panthers. Don't forget to subscribe to the Locked On Florida Panthers YouTube channel and send in your screenshot of your subscription to the page and send it over to me at LO_FLA Panthers, or email it at lockedonflapanthers@gmail.com for your chance to win 2 free tickets to the Florida Panthers versus Chicago Blackhawks game on March 10th. Best of luck, everybody. So we've spoken a little bit about this stretch for the Florida Panthers. A lot of games in hand will be made up for the teams contending with the Cats. And with these days off and the Florida Panthers getting an off day and 2 practice days as well, this is a chance to bring in people who are there consistently on the daily, who have more of a pulse of the Florida Panthers, and very thankful to be bringing in the play-by-play voice of the Florida Panthers radio network, the Territory Talk podcast, and the Panthers Insider Show. It is Doug Plagens. Doug, welcome back to Locked On Panthers.
Thanks very much for having me, Armando. Always great to be on the show.
Thank you, and thank you for coming on. Where we have a little bit of a break from at least game action, but of course there was practice today at FLA Live Arena for the Panthers. And Doug, I want to ask you how as far as this season through 60 games, what would you say as far as like an overall summary as far as this season? What are your biggest takeaways of this Panthers team through 60 games?
Well, they've weathered some tough stretches. As you know, they had some stretches where some key players were out of the lineup, and we're not talking just for a game or two. I mean, it's maybe easy to forget now because it's been a while, but you go back to the early parts of the season, there was a 10 or 11 game stretch without Aaron Ekblad. There was a 10 or 11 game stretch without Barkov in there. There was a stretch without Radko Gudas, without Anton Lundell. Panthers had to weather a lot in terms of some key guys being in and out of the lineup at times. Also had to weather a schedule. And I know everybody plays a tough schedule. I know that everybody in the league is going to have stretches that they wonder, how did we end up with this? But the Panthers had some runs on their schedule that I've never seen before. And for example, that month of January, there was a time where between the 6th and 24th of January, if you count Sunrise being a stop-off, because that's all it was a stop-off when the Panthers came home in January, there was a stretch between the 6th and 24th of January where the Panthers were in 10 cities in less than 3 weeks. I don't care how you're traveling. I don't care what kind of hotels you're staying in. That's going to take a lot out of you. And I'd get on the plane and I would think, like, I'm tired right now. And I wasn't just the one chasing Sidney Crosby up and down the ice tonight. So I can only imagine what a grind that is. But at the same time, during what a lot of people would have thought was perhaps the most difficult stretch of the season for the Panthers, not only from a scheduling perspective, but also a quality of opponent perspective. They played some really good teams during that month of January, and during that grind of a schedule, the Panthers started to see consistent positive results and found a rhythm, maybe more so than they had at any other point during the year. a lot of the game plan they've been sticking to all season was starting to pay off. Let's not forget, going back to the early part of the year, Panthers ran into a few games where maybe they deserved better than they got, whether it was a game where they got one, should have gotten two, or should have gotten at least one and walked away empty-handed, ran into a hot goalie. Some things like that were happening a little too often earlier in the year, but that pendulum has swung back the other way. Things have started to even out. The Panthers have gotten onto a groove, and that's why I think at this point, especially with the rest and the amount of home games coming up for this team, you're looking at a more dangerous Panthers team than we've really seen at any other point during the year. And obviously with Anthony Duclair's return, hopefully being, very soon here at some point in time, that could be a real jolt to the team. Everybody's tired at this time of the year, but the Panthers right now, and this is all they had to do. They didn't have to be in a spot necessarily right now, but just position themselves to grab a spot. I think they've done exactly that, and they're in as good a spot as anybody. I know the games played need to even out, and over the course of this week, next week, the week after, we're going to see that games played total even out a little bit. But I think the Panthers have positioned themselves as well as anybody to be able to make a good pursuit of one of those wild card spots.
Yeah, and as of this recording at 2:13 p.m. on a Wednesday, they're holding on to that second wild card spot. With of course those teams behind them still have games in hand to make up, and we'll see more of that. It honestly, next Tuesday we'll get more when they face the Lightning. We'll get more of a picture of it. But
and I think for the tonight, at the time of this recording, tonight the Islanders play. And so as soon as the Islanders step on the ice tonight, feel like it'll be the first time in a while that the Panthers aren't the team with the most games played in the league or tied for the most games played in the league. After tonight, the Islanders will have the most games played in the National Hockey League. So again, we're starting to see those totals start to even out, and teams are catching up to the Panthers in the games played.
No doubt. And there's this quote that you basically say every beginning of the season, mostly as far as going back to Territory Talk episodes, and it's this quote: "The players that you have on opening night won't be the same as game number 82." And let's go back to that, where the Panthers were in a huge crunch, having 20 players on their roster on opening night. Of course, with Anthony Duclair going on LTIR, and of course Patrick Hornquist still being on the roster at the time, and then being up to 20. At that time, I was thinking, how are the Panthers gonna go through this season? And of course, the unexpected parts of the season, as far as injuries, as far as going through the grind of the season. And you spoke about weathering storms as well. And now Anthony Duclair is going to be back with this team, hopefully by Friday. As far as Duclair being back, and of course, going back to your quote of game 1 versus game 82, how do you see Duclair's style of play fitting in with Paul Maurice's system? Of course, with the last time he was on the ice, of course, scratched in game 6 against Washington, comes back and scores the first goal against Tampa Bay, but a little bit of maybe a sour taste in his mouth after the second round series against Tampa Bay.
Well, there's no doubt he's going to be hungry and motivated, just like everybody else on this Panthers team was coming into the season. And, having had a taste of the playoffs, they want to taste more of that. But for Anthony Duclair, when he gets back into this lineup, that is, as good as any trade deadline acquisition that anybody across the league is going to be able to make. And the Panthers have this guy right here, just making sure that he's right, that he's ready, and he's able to get back, that he's physically ready to get back into the lineup and play at the level that he and the team wants him to play at. So he's a guy that can bring a huge boost. That speed on the wing that he has is not something that every team has. Every team would love to have a guy like that. Not everybody does have a guy like that. The Panthers fortunate enough that they have one right here, and they're just waiting on him to make sure that he's full green light and ready to go, which again sounds like it's coming up here pretty soon. We'd love to see Friday, but it sounds like it's going to be pretty soon. So we'll wait and see exactly when that happens. But things are trending that way. Paul Maurice has said that he looks good, and I know they can't wait to get him back in the lineup. Not sure exactly what his workload, what his minutes, what his responsibilities will entirely look like when he gets back in, because as you know, you can practice all you want, and you can rehab all you want. But once you get out there at game speed in the National Hockey League, this far into the season where everybody else is in, for lack of a better way to put it, midseason form, and you're getting into playoff races where the intensity has ratcheted up a bit, here in recent weeks, and you can feel that, he's going to be a guy that can certainly give this team a boost. But again, no clarity yet as to exactly what that workload will look like. But any version and any dose of Anthony Duclair that this team can get will be a welcome one and a helpful one when that happens.
Yeah, for sure. And it's definitely going to be a big boost for this team when he does return. Nothing official from the Panthers as far as paper transactions, but Kobe Guy of Florida Hockey Now did say that Grigory Denisenko and Chris Tierney don't have stalls right now inside the Panthers locker room. So we'll see more of the paper transactions maybe tomorrow or even before Friday. But we're going to transition over to segment number 2, where we're going to discuss more of the state of the Cats with Doug Plagens, ask him more about who's he's been impressed by most, and of course the broadcasting perspective from Doug Plagens here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But first, we're going to tell you all about FanDuel Sportsbook. And we're the midway point through the NBA and NHL season is here, and it's the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe and secure and easy to use. Then you can bet on anything from the money line to point scores to threes drain. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss your chance for a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. Segment number 2 here on this Thursday, February 23rd edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. It is a State of the Cats edition of the show, where the radio play-by-play voice of the Florida Panthers, the Territory Talk podcast, and the Panthers Insider Show, Doug Plagens, is back here on the show. I do have a personal question for you regarding the just going into a typical game. Of course, for home games, you have your broadcast partner, Billy Lindsay. Of course, you have a broadcast partner with you. But at least for most away games, if not all of them, you're out there by yourself with no color commentary there with you, while Bill Lindsay goes to NHL Network in Secaucus, New Jersey. And how different is it for you calling games when you are by yourself versus when you do have your broadcast partner in Bill Lindsay?
It is different, no doubt about that. And that's exactly what it is. It's a different broadcast, and I wouldn't say that I prepare totally differently. And obviously I love working with Billy. I can tell you it's really amazing. We worked like one period together my first season, and I felt like I'd known him for 10 years. He's just such an easygoing, just easy to work with guy. And he's turned into a heck of a broadcaster. And again, I just love working with him, and he's been unbelievable to me since I showed up. So to be able to walk in here, and have a broadcast partner like Billy that's been something special and something I'm thankful for every single day. But at the same time, it's a different kind of broadcast. I know that when we're on the road and I'm by myself, I'm going to get to more of those little tidbits that I jot down, before a game. And you just kind of have that in the back of your mind, like, there's going to be more fill in the gaps during this game. Whereas, normally it would be a rhythm between Billy and I at a home game. So I do more of the filling in of the gaps. Maybe I'm a little bit more analytical when I'm working by myself, but at the same time, before I came to the Panthers, and anybody who took a route similar to mine to the NHL would probably say the same thing. But I called over 500 games in the minors between the ECHL and the American Hockey League. And for about, 80% of those, I was by myself for all of them. So it's not anything that I wasn't used to coming in. Okay. It's something I'm totally prepared for. And anybody who comes up working through the minor leagues is used to is used to having in some way, just it's the minor leagues compared to the National Hockey League. Your resources might be a little bit more limited at times, especially when you're on the road and things like that. So it's nothing I'm not prepared for. And like I said, regardless of the game, home, road, broadcast partner, no broadcast partner, I'll be prepared either way.
Yeah, and it's also different as far as whenever he's saying a statement, analyzing the game, and then when a big play happens, you having to possibly interrupt him to say what's going on for a possible goal as well. And even when he's saying something, it's like an opportunity for you to like take a sip of water if you need to like rest the voice, versus if you're going to like commercial break, then that's when you get like your water break as well. So hydration also fills in is a big part of that too. When it comes to that. Say again?
Yeah, the hydration is a big part of it. So you always have to have your water, your tea, whatever it is that you have during a game.
Mm-hmm. As far as going back to the Panthers, who has been the Panther player who has impressed you the most this season through 60 games?
Well, there are different levels of it, and I guess different subcategories of what you'd say would be impressive. And I would say, obviously, coming in, doesn't matter what your talent level is, transitioning to a new team can be challenging. We've seen some guys not have as seamless a transition as others to a new team. But Matthew Tkachuk has come in here, and whether it's scoring, setting up his teammates, I don't know that he has gotten the credit he deserves for the kind of passer that he is, on top of, being able to score those goals from right out in front of the net. His passing, which goes along with his hands, which goes along with his ability, as Paul Maurice has said, to not just deflect pucks, but he steers pucks. He's got a rare ability when he's tipping a shot. He's not just trying to get a stick on it. He's getting a stick on it, but directing it specifically a direction that he wants it to go. Not a lot of guys can do that. So for him to produce the way he has so consistently, he's coming up on 30 multi-point games. He's going to be there pretty soon. And it hasn't mattered who he's played with. He's played with a number of different guys. He's done a ton of it at 5-on-5, in addition to being a key player on the power play. So Matthew Tkachuk's been in here and been totally as advertised for this Panthers team. He's done anything and everything that could have been asked. And then on top of that, he plays with that edge and that attitude and that ability to drag the team into the fight that I think everybody knew came with him as well. So he's brought an attitude, but he's also brought a huge point-producing dimension to this Panthers team. So there's Matthew Tkachuk. There's also Carter Verhaeghe. Don't look now, but there's 22 games left at the time we're recording this. He's got 30 goals. So he's scoring about a goal every other game. If he does that for the rest of the season, he could finish at 40 goals.
Amazing.
That would be an unbelievable milestone. He scored 30 for the first time in his career. That overtime winner the other day against Anaheim was number 30 for the first time in his career. And 40 is not out of the question for him. He's turned into he's a shoot first guy. He's got a dangerous shot, and he's shown the ability to score from anywhere on the ice, and the speed that he has. You see just the confidence that he brings. We had him on our Territory Talk podcast not too long ago, and the long and winding road that he took to become a regular in the NHL. I mean, he went up through the ECHL to the American Hockey League. He had to prove himself every step of the way. Then he got to the National Hockey League, and he had a stretch where, it was kind of a numbers game in Tampa. They were just loaded. And, for lack of a better way to put it, there were days he said he would come to the rink and he wasn't sure if he was going to be in or out that game. And now to climb his way into being not only an NHL regular, but a top line goal scorer, point producer, who's not flying under anybody's radar. And again, can play with a lot of guys and has done most of his damage in the National Hockey League at 5-on-5, which is also impressive. That's been something to see this year. I think if you were going to go to the blue line, Brandon Montour, and you can look at Gus Forsling same way, but Brandon Montour elevating his minutes, look at the point production he's put up, and Gus Forsling, it's amazing to see that this is a guy the Panthers got for nothing a few years ago. And he is turned into just a top pair guy, and he could handle that role on any team, and he can he can be right in the middle of the offense, and he skates so smoothly and so well that he'll get right back on defense before anybody else will. And you feel like he never makes a mistake because he can always skate to where he needs to be, no matter where he is on the ice. He's an world-class skater. So you look at those guys, but one guy I want to point to specifically is Eric Staal and what he's brought in terms of not only leadership to this team, but he's been able to produce. He's embraced a penalty kill role. He's made guys around him better. You can tell that leadership has rubbed off. There are a lot of guys on this Panthers team that I think it was NHL 06, the video game. We talked to Nick, I think it was Nick Cousins, or no, it was Carter Verhaeghe who mentioned it. Said he had the video game that Eric Staal was on, as a kid. And this, Eric Staal was winning an Olympic gold for Team Canada, and he was a Stanley Cup winner back in 06. He won the Olympic gold. He's gotten a gold at the World Championship. There are only, I believe, 5 guys in hockey history who've won all 3 of those. So at this point, I mean, he's a future Hall of Famer. He's here because he wants to win. He told us that before the season started, and he's here because he's dedicated to his craft and he loves the game. And it's really been fun to see the chemistry he's developed playing with Ryan Lomberg and Nick Cousins. They've been together a lot. And that line, even when they're not scoring, that line's been able to change the Panthers' fortunes in games just by giving them good forechecking pressure, good puck possession. I've said it on the air. Sometimes if an opponent is getting some traction and getting a lot of pressure, it's almost like calling a timeout when you throw the Staal, Lomberg, Cousins line on the ice, because it's like, okay, we're going to put these guys out there. They're going to get it in. They're going to keep it down there for a bit. They're going to give the Panthers a chance to reset and regroup. And when the next group comes on the ice, the Panthers will probably have a little bit of momentum going in their favor, because that line will either have gotten a couple of big hits, gotten a scoring chance, or at very least just kept the puck down in the offensive end for a little bit while the rest of the group caught their breath. So Eric Stahl's been a huge part of this team. And we saw that stretch of time when he was out of the lineup, the penalty kill unit, for example, they suffered a little bit without him. So he's been so valuable. And, he and Eetu Luostarinen have been first over the boards on the penalty kill a lot. So the Panthers have had a number of guys really step forward in a number of different ways. But I think you can't look at what Eric Stahl's been able to do, especially for a guy who's as decorated as he is, to come in and embrace this role. It's been something cool to see. And I can tell you, just from the first time I talked to him, absolutely, no ego about the guy whatsoever. For a guy who's accomplished as much as he has in the game, he just loves being there every day. And he wants to get better every day, and he wants to help the team get better every day. And he's been really a fun guy to have around.
Yeah. And at 38 years old, after not scoring in his first 16 games, and now he's been on this run. They were on a 17-2 shot on goal advantage on Monday's game against the Ducks, and eventually that's going to probably be your 4th line later going on in the season. It was for a little bit. They've been the 3rd line for a while, and that's just going to bring your confidence into the bottom 6. Of course, with Duclair coming back, Eetu Luostarinen likely going back to the 3rd line too. So it's just going to bring more balance into the lineup as well for this team. And it's just a beautiful thing to see for this Panthers team. But we're going to transition over to segment number 3, where we're going to put a bow on this state of the edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, a State of the Cats edition. So stay here with myself and the radio play-by-play voice of the Florida Panthers, Doug Plagens.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Third and final segment on this Thursday, February 23rd edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. It is another edition of State of the Cats with the radio play-by-play voice of the Florida Panthers, the Territory Talk podcast and the Panthers Insider Show. Doug Plagens here on the show. And Doug, gotta talk a little bit about the goaltending here. Sergei Bobrovsky has just been great, and and of course an unsung hero prior to the All-Star break in Alex Lyon. Of course, the numbers don't really tell the story about what Alex Lyon meant to the Panthers in that stretch of time. But there's also the question of Spencer Knight. He dealt with injury, out for a month, played 2 AHL games, one of them being a shutout, and of course, two of those starts, one being in St. Louis where the Florida Panthers ran out of gas, and of course the Nashville game where Spencer comes in relief of Bobrovsky. How are you seeing the goaltending situation for the Panthers?
Well, on that note, I do, like you said, Alex Lyon, we can't overlook what he did for this team to come in and just give them some quality minutes and some quality starts. He was 3-2-1 in 6 decisions there at a time when the Panthers, needed somebody to come in and just fill a void while Sergei and Spencer were out of the lineup. So he did that against some good teams, picked up a win against Minnesota, the win against Boston, obviously, that I think a lot of people look back on now. And regardless of how things pan out this season, that was a turning point for this team to come away with 2 points on a night where they were, I believe, 48 seconds away from coming away with nothing. And think about how the standings would look now. I know 2 points are 2 points, but if you took 2 points off the Panthers right now, it would drastically change the positioning in that wild card race. So there's no doubt that was some kind of a turning point for this team, and Alex Lyon was in net for that, a 3-2 win for the Panthers over Boston. So he gave this team some quality minutes, some quality starts when they needed them most. And throughout this season, we've seen each goaltender, when you talk about Bobrovsky and Knight, we've seen them each get on runs, but there's no doubt right now, and Paul Maurice has said this, going back to that game when Bobrovsky came on in relief in Winnipeg back in early December. He said he came out with a bit of an attitude, almost looking angry in the net there at that point in time, a chip on his shoulder. And he's been on a good roll since then. And since the All-Star break, for the most part, he's been outstanding. And they're going to need that. The way the schedule lines up with all the home games, and especially just with the importance right now, Sergei's kind of emerged here with the games getting more important, with a chance to, I don't think the Panthers have too much in the way of back-to-backs coming up here in the near future. So a chance to really just run with Sergei right now. I feel like that's what we'd be looking at. And that's kind of what you want this time of the year. You want a guy if you have one guy who's rolling, one guy who's hot, one guy who's in a groove, that's what I think every team would want. And Sergei's the kind of battler that he wants the crease every single day. And Paul Maurice has mentioned lately, he said he kind of turned back the clock. He looks like the past 2-time Vezina Trophy winner. So for the Panthers, that's a great thing to see. And you can tell he's locked in when he gets out there every night. Sergei wants this bad, and he's been a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, definitely has been, and of course, I've said it from the start. It's more detrimental to the team if Sergei Bobrovsky is not performing to the level that of his cap hit, because of course, if Spencer Knight's taking the majority of the start, it's basically dead cap on your as a backup goaltender. But he is definitely turned it on in since the middle of December.
And also, I can tell you this, I mentioned this on Territory Talk, but in my mind, looking at the teams in that mix for a wild card spot, again, we'll see how everything shakes out. But of the teams there, and maybe my prediction will be maybe it'll be right or wrong, I don't know. But if you look at the other teams in the mix, okay, Pittsburgh, and I feel like Pittsburgh's going to get in with Tristan Jarry. They're a different team. They're going to get in. Detroit, Buffalo, Washington, the Islanders, the Panthers, of course, I would consider to be the teams. And Ottawa, who knows? We've seen crazier things happen. They are surging in. I don't buy their goaltending. They're a team to be reckoned with in the future. Maybe they get hot enough to fight for a spot, but I'm not sure that goaltending can hold up for a playoff race. But I'll tell you this, of the teams battling for a wild card spot, the Panthers and the Islanders, in my mind, are the two teams in that group that, should they get in, have the best opportunity to make a run, to win a couple of rounds. And the reason I say that is because the Panthers have Sergei Bobrovsky and because the Islanders have Ilya Sorokin. And we've seen time and time again, you get to the playoffs, goaltending is the most important position. And if your guy's rolling, he can win you a series. And Sergei Bobrovsky is a guy that can win a series for a team. He's a guy that could carry a team on his back deep into the playoffs. The Islanders have a guy like that too, in Ilya Sorokin. So that's why I'd say out of those groups, I think the Panthers and the Islanders can win rounds. I think the rest of that group, if they get in, I think they're one and done.
Yeah, and we're looking to see that likely that last it's likely going to be for the last wild card spot because, of course, Tristan Jarry did come back on Monday for the Penguins, and their points percentage puts them in a good spot to have them in the first spot. So chances are it's going to be Boston.
And with Jarry, we've seen it. With Jarry, the Penguins have had some good hot streaks this season. Without Tristan Jarry, they have just not been consistent. So if he's the goalie, they've probably already done enough to hang on to the spot they've got. I know because of math, they've fallen out of it here and there lately, but because of the game's played disparity, I think they're going to be one of the teams that's there.
Yeah, and the good news about the Panthers is that they've beaten Boston twice. Of course, one of them being comeback fashion, and the first matchup. You think about that first matchup, which is like the fourth game of the season, losing two of your defensemen. Aaron Ekblad, that was his last game before his stint on LTIR, and then Brandon Montour losing him in that game, and that game was close too, on the road too as well. The second road game was a product of goaltending as well for that one, but still, I really do believe that the Panthers can really challenge the Boston Bruins. As far as predictions, as far as if they face, I'm not there yet. Get in first as far as that, and then
we know, hockey, the National Hockey League is the ultimate just get in sport.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in the other sports, in basketball, 8 seeds don't move on.
Yeah,
but in the NHL, we've seen 8 seeds win Stanley Cups, get to the finals, make runs. The NHL is the ultimate just get in sport. And there was a time, once upon a time, we've talked about this on our podcast too, once upon a time, before the Sharks came into the league, the whole decade of the 80s, 16 out of 21 teams made the playoffs in the National Hockey League. There were some teams that did make the playoffs, and inevitably, they were punching bags for the Edmonton Oilers or the Calgary Flames or the Philadelphia Flyers or the Canadiens, the other teams that had great runs back in the 1980s and the teams that were consistently in the mix. That doesn't happen anymore. Everybody who makes the playoffs in the NHL is good. 16 out of 32. Half of the league gets in. Mm-hmm. Nobody's getting into the playoffs by accident in the National Hockey League. There's always a team or two on the outside looking in when the playoffs come around that the top teams are looking at saying, you know, I'm kind of glad that team didn't get in because they were surging and that team could have been dangerous had they squeaked in and gotten another point or two at some point throughout the year. I guess what I'm saying here is nobody gets into the playoffs by accident. Everybody's good. The National Hockey League, the talent gap between number 1 and number 16 is not that huge of a gap. Basically, once you get in, anybody can beat anyone.
Yeah, and let's talk about recent history as far as the decade with the LA Kings, the Nashville Predators making it to the final, as well as anyone could beat anyone as far as that. But Doug, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Great to also be going by you and passing in the press box when I do happen to go down to games, and hopefully one day, maybe after a game, maybe we can grab some soup together.
There won't be soup. If you want to have soup, I won't tell you not to have the soup, but I'm not having the soup. That's your deal. You can have the soup. I'll get something else.
You just know I had to get that one in there. That's for sure. But Doug, for everyone listening, tell everybody where they can follow you online.
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Doug Plagens. That's really the place to go. Tune into the Territory Talk podcast wherever you find your podcasts, and on our flagship station, you can catch the Panthers Insider Show every Saturday morning at 9:00, and you can find it online after it airs. So if you miss it, if you're not up at 9:00 in the morning, if that's too early for you, you'll always be able to find it. And of course, every Panthers radio broadcast, all the different places to tune in from our affiliates in Miami-Dade and Broward counties, from 560 WQAM down to 100.3 Thunder Country in the Keys, 1230 The Gambler up in the Palm Beaches, to SiriusXM. And I always tell people this: if you're a SiriusXM subscriber and you have the SiriusXM app, channel 932 on that app is always the Panthers game, and it's always our broadcast. So every major league sports team has one of those. I'm a frequent listener during the fall to the Detroit Lions on channel 810, but every team has one of those on the SiriusXM app. The Panthers are channel 932, and it's always us. So just one of the many ways to check it out. And the NHL app, that eliminates all the guesswork. If you've got the NHL app, the scoreboard, the little headphone icon up in the top right corner, you pick the game, you pick the Panthers feed, and off you go. And that eliminates all the guesswork. So lots of different ways to tune in, and we appreciate you for tuning in any way that you choose to listen. And thanks very much to you, Armando, for having me on the show.
Thank you. And let's not also forget the Odyssey app, which is in partnership with the Locked On Podcast Network here, as well as far as that. And of course, the recommendation that Doug always says for non-Panthers TV broadcasts to link up your broadcast of the radio feed to the ESPN or TNT.
Yeah, if you're looking to sync it up, folks, the radio feed is always behind your TV feed, probably by a little bit. So what you do when you're watching it, you pause the game at a whistle. When you hear that same whistle on the radio, hit play. You should be good to go at that point. Pretty easy.
And I gave that a try, and it totally works. So it definitely does, and you get definitely more of a descriptive one as Doug is trying to paint the picture as he is there at every arena. That's for sure. But Doug, thank you so much once again, and I will see you next time on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey, Flip Livingstone and Stu Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And for your second listen of the day, make sure to listen to today's episode of Locked On Sports Today. Peter Bukowski gives you a 30-minute or less podcast on the entirety of the sports scene. Listen to Locked On Sports Today on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast. So I'm Armando Velez with Doug Plagens, and you've been listening to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.